In this lecture, we're going to explore a feature that's going to make our lives easier. In our file, we are using the react.createElement function to create elements. It's very unintuitive and unreadable. What if we had hundreds of elements, not to mention the attributes for each element? Our application can become hideous with a few dozen elements. Luckily, React has a solution that addresses this issue. What if I told you you could write HTML in a JavaScript file? That's completely possible with an extension called JSX. Before our files are loaded on the browser, our code goes through a package called Webpack. Webpack is a tool designed for bundling and optimizing your code for production. We saw an example of what Webpack can do. It can remove white space from our code. This process is automated for us. It can do so much more. Webpack has been configured to convert JSX into the react.createElement function. So, what is JSX? The developers of React have created an extension for JavaScript. It's called JSX. It's a syntax that allows HTML-like code to be written in a JavaScript file. Before files are delivered to the browser, JSX will be converted into the createElement function. Here's an example. To be clear, JSX is not HTML. The syntax is similar, but there are differences. Not everything from the HTML language will be available in JSX. Let's start writing some JSX. In our project, let's update the page function. First, we will completely replace the return value with a pair of parentheses. Multi-line JSX is supported. However, it must be wrapped with a pair of parentheses. Otherwise, you may run into issues. Afterward, we can begin writing JSX elements. Let's try recreating the same interface. Inside the parentheses, let's add a div tag. Next, add an h1 tag with 2 paragraph tags. Each tag should have dummy content. So far, it's starting to look like HTML. JSX makes writing templates feel intuitive. However, there are some differences. Firstly, we're not allowed to return multiple root elements. Currently, everything is wrapped with a div tag. What do you think will happen if we were to remove the surrounding div tag? Let's give it a try. After removing the div tag, the page will throw an error. It states the following: JSX expressions must have one root element. As you can see, we must always have one root element. However, this restriction can cause issues. What if we don't need a div tag? Adding additional HTML to satisfy the compiler is not considered good practice. This practice can potentially break our CSS. Fortunately, React has a custom element to address this problem. There's a special element called a fragment. Fragments are elements that can surround multiple elements without introducing a new tag. Fragments are written as empty tags. Let's remove the div keyword from the tags. This syntax can look awkward, but it's completely valid JSX. On the page, the error should go away. Let's inspect the elements to check out what has been returned. Under the Elements panel, the fragment has been completely removed. The parent element is the div tag with the ID of root. By using fragments, we can remove clutter from our document. There's one more feature worth mentioning. Classes are supported, but with a different attribute. On the h1 tag, add an attribute called className. Its value will be a class called orange. Keep in mind, we're writing JSX inside a JavaScript file. We're still bound by the rules of JavaScript. JavaScript has a reserved keyword called class. It just so happens that HTML also has a reserved keyword called class. This commonality creates a conflict of interest. Since we're in a JavaScript file, JavaScript wins the battle. JSX has a different attribute for applying classes to an element called className. If we were to use the class keyword, JavaScript might assume we're trying to perform a different action. It would throw an error in our code. Let's try applying styles to the element by using this class. Inside the source directory, there's a file called style.css. Let's add a class called orange. It'll change the text color of an element to orange. We're not finished yet. This file does not get automatically loaded into our document. We have two options. We can link it from the HTML file, or we can import it. Strangely, importing might be the best option. Webpack is not limited to processing JavaScript files. It can process CSS files too. By importing our JavaScript file, Webpack will be able to process our CSS files. Back in the index.js file, import the CSS file with the import statement. This behavior might seem strange. By default, JavaScript does not support CSS imports. This is another benefit of using Webpack. New features are added to the language that can make development easier. If we look at the page, the text color for the heading has changed to orange. For the rest of this course, we are going to stick with JSX. It's easier to read than the createElement function. Hopefully, you'll agree with me. Let's continue our studies in the next lecture.